Hey there, Mel Abraham here, the author of the #1 best-selling book, The Entrepreneur's Solution, and the founder of Thoughtpreneur Academy, where we teach you how to capture, package, and monetize what you know so you can have greater freedom, greater impact, and greater income. And welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur Solution Show. Let me get down to nuts and bolts. How do you really take your concepts and communicate them in a way that not only do you get action out of the people that you're serving, but you get results. And frameworks are the key. You know that I am a framework junkie. So we're going to talk about the fundamentals of frameworks in this episode as we dig in, because it's about how do you use frameworks to create understanding and results. And if you're not using frameworks in your training, in your teaching, in your speaking, in the things that you do, you're missing the boat. All right? And I really believe that. So here's the thing. I'm going to give you what I call the framework formula here. And if you want that action guide, just download it. Go to melabraham.com/session094, and I'll give you the download of the action guide so you can really work through the framework formula. If you're not at your computer, totally get it. If you're running around or listening to this on your iPhone or mobilely, just text me. Text me My Legacy, one word, to 38470. I'll send you the download link so you can get all of the value out of this episode. Let's get started. All right, here we go. Here's the thing. How do you create frameworks? And frameworks, you can hear it called models. You hear, but you'll see me, if you see me speak, if you see any of the episodes, there's always a framework attached to it. And the reason for that is that it allows people to really start to understand complex concepts in a simple way. Here's how I see it. We are actually visual learners. I know that some people say, well, I'm auditory, this and that, and I get it. But if you think about it historically as a people, the first language that we learned, whether it was in caveman days, was pictures. We learned to speak with pictures, and frameworks create pictures. They create systems. It creates a geometry that represents things in people's minds that they can go, wow, I can duplicate it. And so that's really what the deal is. Here's the challenge. If we don't get this right, if we are not using frameworks, or we're not building frameworks that are meaningful or that have the right factors or elements and characteristics to them, a couple things are going to happen. You're going to have your audience, your marketplace, the people you serve, they're going to be lost in complexity and confusion. I mean, as you see this, and maybe this works in the context of running electricity and all that, but it's a mess. And if I handed that to someone and said, here's how we do it, you're going to look at it and go, oh my God, are you kidding me? And so the key is that we want to reverse that. We want people, if our audience doesn't see that, isn't able to say to themselves, I need this, I want this, I need it now, and I can do this, they're never going to buy from you. So the real key is that the frameworks really gets them to that point of I can do this, because they start to understand it. If we don't get this right, the other thing that happens is that there's no understanding. I mean, we're confused, and I don't understand it, and I don't grasp it. When someone draws a picture for me, or when I do that with you, or with a class, or with an audience, whether it's thousands or one-on-one, all of a sudden it starts to come to life. And the other thing that happens is that if they don't understand it, and it's complex and confusing, then what really happens is there's just no progress. We're stagnant. We're stuck in inertia. And if we're really looking at things, if we are to be an influencer, if we're really looking at it from being an influencer in the market space, that market leader, what those 3%, the top 3% do, what we need to do is, what we're trying to do is really get them to move and create behavior change. But the only way we can create behavior change is through thought change. In other words, we need to shift their thinking first if we expect to shift their actions. They got to think differently. And the way we do that is to get inside their thinking and help them think differently. And I do that, and most of the times we do that is typically a framework is involved. Because here's the deal. When we get this right, things shift. When we get this right, all of a sudden, that mess becomes simple. What I say is that frameworks move you from the edge of complexity to the edge of simplicity. And when they look at it and go, is that all it is? Now you got them in a place where they're starting to say, I can do that. I can do that. And when it's simple, what ultimately will start to happen is they start to look at things and they go, wait a second. I can see myself in there. What they literally do is they project themselves into the framework and say, here's where I am, here's how I can do this, here's where I can go with this. And all of a sudden they start to see themselves in the framework itself. And in the end, it gives them a path to results. They start to see that there's actually a path to getting the results that they're looking to get. And until they see a path, they're not going to take the first step. You may have a handful of people that are willing to follow you blindly, but I think that in order to do this properly and to serve the greater population, the people in your audience, your marketplace at that higher level, they need to get the feeling that there's a path to the results that they're getting, that they want to get. Because ultimately we are trying to take them from point A to point B. From where they are, the pains, the challenges, the frustrations, the fears that they have, to the aspirations and the dreams that they want. And it's through this process of saying, I can see through the fog, I can see through the clouds, I can see through the crowded space, the pathway, because you've given me the pathway. And a framework allows you to do that. So if that's why, in other words, what we're really looking to try and do is give them a pathway to results. We're trying to let them see themselves in it, and to bring it so it's become simple. Then what do you need to know? In order to bring frameworks to life in your speaking, whether you're coaching, whether you're consulting, whether you're an advisor, whether you're a teacher, it doesn't matter where you use them. There's a place for them in almost everything we do. So what is it that you need to know? And I'll give you 3 of the principles that I think are really important in understanding frameworks in general. And then I'm going to teach you and talk about at least the fact that there's 6 different kinds of frameworks that you may use in different places and where you use them. So what are the things you need to know? First is this, is that we need to understand that a framework is just geometry. And I get it. You know, some of you may not be your creators and stuff and you don't want to talk about math, but it really is taking three shapes, because there's basically squares, circles, triangles. That's it. Taking those 3 shapes and pushing them together. Now you may turn around and say, well, there's ovals. Well, oval's just a squashed circle, and a rectangle is a squashed square. So really 3 different shapes. And what we're looking at is trying to understand, how do you put shapes together to indicate a certain emotion, a certain movement, a certain action, a certain feeling for our audience to grasp. And so geometry is real, and we're going to need to use geometry as part of the process. The second principle to understand is that emotions are embedded in the framework. As much as it's shapes, and you could say this is just logical work, there's actually emotions embedded into the framework. And what do I mean by that? I mean that when you get a chance, when your audience, when your marketplace, when your customer, when your client sees themselves inside the framework, they also identify with the fears, the frustrations, and the aspirations and the dreams, if it's built correctly. And it's through that emotional connection within the framework that gets them to move. So hopefully this will make sense as we start to move forward, because we'll talk about value frameworks. We'll talk about process frameworks. We'll talk a little bit about each of these frameworks and what they are, because in a value framework, for instance, they see where they are and they see where they want to go. And they have that hunger and that yearning to move themselves up into that space. And so when you can create that in a picture, in a graphic in their mind, it's going to connect with their emotions too. So hopefully that makes sense. And then one of the last principles to consider here in this is to realize that the choreography gives it life. In other words, I'm not just going to slap. If you watch me unpack my frameworks, I build them with you. I don't just slap up the graphic and say, here it is. Even when I'm speaking on big stages and I'm not drawing it out and it's being built on a slide, it's being built piece by piece, and it's got choreography to it. It's got a syntax to it. It's got a process to it, because I want to unpack it in a way that, one, moves you along the process, moves you along to understanding. Because remember, I want to get you to that point of saying, I need this, I want this, and I can do this. And if I just give you this big graphic with all this stuff on it, it becomes overwhelming. The idea is we got to bring this to simplicity. So let me take it one step at a time with you. So those are the key principles when we're really kind of looking at this. First is to understand that there's geometry involved. There's shapes that we're going to use, and that different shapes will indicate different things. For instance, a circle, a triangle, a square. A lot of times you look at it like a triangle. A lot of times indicates action or movement. A circle is connection or inclusion. A square may be boundaries. It just depends on how you present it. So there's different things in all that there's emotions involved in it, and in the end, it's really about the choreography. How do you unpack it in that process? So, and one of the things, if you really want to start understanding, just go back and look at any of the episodes, including this one, because I'm doing the same thing each and every time to really build it out. So, in order to do this, here's what I want to do is I want to introduce you to something called the framework formula. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of how do you build each framework. I'm going to talk about the 4 common elements that all frameworks will have. And then I'm going to give you an understanding, or at least a fundamental understanding, of the 6 types of frameworks you might find yourself dealing with, or you might find use for in your business, in your practice, in your speaking, your coaching, your mentoring, your advising, whatever it is. And so you get that awareness, and then we can go deeper into how do you build each of those frameworks at another time. So in order to do this, we're going to jump to the iPad, and I'm going to draw this out for you, and you're going to see this all come to life. So let's just jump to that, and let's get going. So here's what we're going to do. All right, so there's 4 aspects of a framework typically that we need to consider as we move forward. And as I said, there's 6 types of frameworks that I think that you can see or you can use depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But all 6 of them will have some of these 4 have these elements in there at some level. They may not be all at the same. They may not be equal, but you're going to have them at some level. And the first piece is to realize, as I said before, that there's a geometry involved. And when I say geometry, like I said, there's squares, triangles, and circles, and they're pushed together. This happens to be a circle. In actuality, when you look at this, it is a circle and squares, because the quadrant in the middle is basically 4 squares, but I've kind of cut it off. But in this case, what I'm trying to do is create a feeling of inclusiveness. In other words, all 4 elements that I'm going to put on this model are ones that are representative. So I'm not necessarily saying one is better than the other. I'm just simply saying that they exist. So realize that when you're building a framework, there's going to be a geometry, and you need to think about what that framework is. In this case, I'm creating a framework that is inclusive of 4 characteristics and 6 types. So it gives you this choice. There may be other frameworks when you look back that you'll see are rectangles in a ladder, or triangles, or funnels, which are really triangles, or a Venn diagram, or a quadrant model. They all have different aspects. They have different action. They have different feelings that come about. But there's a geometry. Realize that every framework has a geometry, and it needs to be really well thought out to bring that home. The second part of this is, and these are the 2 things that are typically obvious, is that each framework has content. What I'm writing on here is content. The content needs to be the meaningful points that start to bring things home and allow for that movement. The other thing to consider, the third thing to consider when you're building your frameworks here, is to ask yourself the question, what emotions am I trying to bring out? Am I trying to get them to identify with their fears or their frustrations in an effort to move them to a different place? I'm trying to get them to look and see their aspirations, their dreams, to draw them that way? Am I trying to give them a process so they have certainty in what they do in building that out? Am I trying to instill certainty in them? Am I trying to instill a more encompassing understanding so they can have some calmness? So what are the emotions you're trying to bring out? And then the last part of this is this element of choreography. Okay? And that is, how do you unpack it? Just like I'm doing here. How do you step by step unwrap the whole thing? Okay? Unwrap the whole thing in a way that it's a dance. That it takes them on this emotional dance of understanding what they need to know, why they need to know it, and what they need to do. When you do that and do it in such a way that it brings simplicity to complexity, now all of a sudden you're going to start to get them to take action. You're going to see them saying to themselves, I can do that. I can duplicate that. Yeah, that's easy enough. To look at it and say, there's 4 things you need to have in a framework: geometry, content, emotion, and choreography. In other words, what's the shape? What's the data I'm going to put in there? What's the feelings that they're going to have? And what's the dance? I don't know how to create a dancing person here. What kind of dance are they going to have? And then this is data. Stuff. So what are those things? Once you identify that, then you realize that, okay, it's pretty easy and straightforward to create that. Now, I said that there's 6 types of frameworks that you're going to run into. And the 6 types of frameworks are used for different purposes. The first framework, and this is one that I use often, is what I call a value framework. You'll hear me call it a value visual. What I'm trying to do in this framework is to present levels of value, if you will, where they can identify where they are currently, identify the challenges that exist, and the roadblocks that exist between where they are currently and where they want to go. So the framework will show them where they are, where they want to go, and give them a path to get there, at least a process to get there, although there is a separate process framework that we'll talk about. So a value framework is something that starts to get them to have that desire, that emotion, that understanding, as well as the belief that there is something better for them and how to get there. So those a lot of times are triangles, they're squares, they're ladders, they're building on each other in many cases. The second type of framework is what I call a what framework. This is when I want to teach someone a set of principles. We talk about it, like for instance, my 9 ideals of legacy. Here's the 9 ideals. Here's the 9 questions that I ask before I take on any kind of business, relationship, commitment. And if any of the answers to any of those 9 questions is no, then I don't take it on. That's called the 9 ideals of legacy. You've seen my negotiation model. That's a what model. It is, what do you need to know, or what do you need to do to make it happen? Most of the time, these frameworks are 3x2s, 3x3 matrices, and things of that nature. The third framework that you may see is what I call a process framework. A process framework. So with a process framework, this is how. This is literally saying, here's the process, here's the steps. Do this, this, and this. And this will be in some sort of flow, some sort of element. So now you start to see that I can create desire with a value framework. I can create an understanding with a what framework, and I can create certainty of the how with a process framework. Then there's three other types of frameworks you might see. One is what I call an if framework. This is kind of evolutionary. If you look at the influencer's evolution, it's concentric circles to show the evolution from just kind of existing to becoming an influencer in the marketplace. You've seen my hierarchy of thinking to go from information to transformational. It's this if we do all of these things, we will evolve to this level. And so that's an if framework. Then the last two are frameworks that we've started to use a bit more often now. The first is what we call an urgency framework. And what I mean by that is that we start to create a model that creates a feeling of urgency, a need to do something now, which when you couple an urgency framework with a value framework, in other words, they see where they are and where they want to go, and you couple it with urgency where they say, gosh, if you delay this, here's what could happen. Now all of a sudden you've got a lot of heat underneath them to move them to action. Remember, we're trying to get to behavior change. And the way we get to behavior change is through thought change. And so we'll create an urgency framework that starts to take into consideration the issue of not doing, basically the cost of inaction, if you look at it that way. And then the last framework is what it's been called the genius framework. Okay, and these are a little more complicated. There's a little more work involved with the genius framework, but with the genius framework, you actually combine a number of these frameworks into one. So all of a sudden, they see their fears and frustrations. They see their desires if they get it right. They see the what. They see the process. And so it's a conglomeration of three or four or two or three of these frameworks in a way that in one picture, and as you unpack it, they get the whole understanding of everything, including why they need to do the things they need to do, what they need to do, what happens if they don't do it, what happens if they do it, and the process to get it done. And that's why we call it a genius framework, because it grasps everything. So I hope that this starts to get you to start thinking. If all you do with looking at frameworks is start to look at it in the context of understanding, how could I draw a picture? How could I bring geometry to what I'm trying to teach to make it simple? And to take that and say, what content needs to be on there? What emotions am I trying to create inside of them that's going to move them to that next step? And how do I need to unpack it? How do I need to choreograph it? What do I need to do first to get them to come along? Because here's the challenge. If you start to unpack a framework and at the very beginning, they dig their heels in, the rest of the framework they're not going to hear. So I need to get them to buy off on the premise at the very beginning, and then they'll move with me through the process. So if we can agree, so for instance, at the beginning of this session, I started to talk about it. I said, we started out learning through pictures, like cavemen as they were drawing pictures on the walls. We are visual learners. Even the alphabet, when we talk about the alphabet, we look at the alphabet and it's a picture of a representation of a letter. So there's always a visual aspect to it. And so when you bring that visual aspect to creating frameworks, changes the dynamic. So I hope this serves you. I can tell you that once I started using some frameworks, both in my book, which I got another book coming out soon, I'm working on, and in my speaking, my mentoring, my coaching, my presenting, it changed the dynamics of everything I do. Because what it allows me to do is, one, with a picture in my mind, to simply go and co-create the picture with the audience. Doesn't matter in what format we're doing it. I'm not as concerned when you start to learn all the principles that we talk about in Thoughtpreneur Academy and being a thoughtpreneur. How do you catalog and capture your information? And you surround it around a framework. Now you have the ability to speak and go. And I do it effectively without notes or anything, because I've got the framework in my mind. And we get a chance to do that. So I think it'll serve you. I think it'll help you out tremendously when you start to build these things out. And it'll take a little while, but all of a sudden they will come to life. And they'll take a life of their own. And it is the thing that a lot of people remember, because they're going to go back and go, I'm not 100% sure, but they drew this. And they start to insert themselves in it. They start to extract things out of it. And it starts to bring a whole level of, new level of meaning to them as you move forward. So that's the framework formula. Download the action guide, melabraham.com/session094. Work through it. Understand it, start utilizing it. It's going to shift and change not only the things you do, but the things that your audience does, that your marketplace does, that your client, your customers do. Bring frameworks up to the surface. There's a lot more I can do on frameworks. We can talk about each one of these types of frameworks and dig in exactly how they can be built, because there's a process to each and every one of them. I go into that really deeply into Thoughtpreneur Academy. But here I just want to get you the fundamentals. If you start thinking in the context of frameworks, and I used to not, but if you start thinking in the context of frameworks, then you're going to have the ability to communicate more effectively, more memorably, more valuably, and more distinctly out there in the future. So again, download the action guide, melabraham.com/session094, or text me my legacy, one word to 38470. Do me a favor also, if you haven't done so, hit subscribe. Just hit subscribe. It's somewhere on this page. Hit subscribe now. Stay with me. A lot more information, a lot more stuff to how do you get yourself out there? How do you position yourself as the market leader, the influencer in your space, so you're the highly paid, highly sought after expert on what you know. And so if you've got something that solves people's problems, helps them get to their dreams, and it's your knowledge that you want to get on the space, this is the place to be. Make sure you subscribe, and do me a favor, one more favor. Share this with a friend. I'm sure that you have other people that are trying to get their information out, are trying to figure out how to do this. This is the key. These are the keys. Share this with a friend. Let's get them on the wagon so we can all do this train together, because I think our society is starved for the things that we can do to have a new way of thinking, and you can lead that for them, and I'd be blessed to be on this journey with you. So until we get a chance to see each other in the next episode, subscribe, share with a friend, download the action guide. Let me know if you have questions, anything that I can do. Go to askmelnow.com, leave me your questions. Let me see if I can bring it up on an upcoming episode. Make sure that I serve you and support you in your journey. Thanks again. Until then, may your vision be grand, your journey epic, and your legacy significant. See you soon. Cheers. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you subscribe so you get access to all of Mel's business and success tips. And if you like this episode, share it with a friend. If you have a specific business or success question, you can ask it at www.askmelnow.com. Remember, it's all about being bold, dreaming big, and living life your way. Because the world needs you. Until the next episode, may your vision be grand, your journey epic, and your legacy significant.